The black teacher at the daycare center slept on the floor with the baby. The billionaire saw it. And then what happened? This is unacceptable. An employee sleeping on the floor like an animal. Principal Patricia's shrill voice echoed through the hallway of Elite Gardens Preschool at 6 in the morning. Call security immediately. Keisha Johnson slowly opened her eyes, still lying on the colorful carpet of the nursery. In her arms, little Thomas, only 8 months old, was sleeping soundly for the first time in 3 days. She didn't move. She didn't justify herself. She just looked at the principal with a calmness that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms. You know that children with special needs require different care, Keisha said softly, stroking the back of the baby who suffered from mild cerebral palsy. Thomas can only sleep when he feels constant human warmth. Patricia snorted, adjusting her expensive blazer. Don't give me excuses. This is a prestigious institution, not a shelter. Parents pay $40,000 a year for their children to receive professional care, not this. Outside, a black Bentley pulled discreetly into the parking lot. Jonathan Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Industries and father of little Thomas, had arrived earlier than usual to pick up his son. Through the window, he watched the whole scene without being noticed. Keisha was only 26 years old, but she carried the responsibility of supporting 3 younger siblings after her parents died in an accident. With a degree in special education with honors, she had accepted the job at the Elite Daycare because it paid triple what any other institution would offer. What she didn't expect was to discover that her degree meant less than the color of her skin in that environment. Gather your things. You're fired, Patricia declared coldly. Inappropriate behavior and violation of institutional rules. That's when something interesting happened. Keisha smiled. Not a smile of resignation or humility, but something different. As if she were keeping a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. Sure, Ms. Patterson. But first, I need to wait for Thomas's father to arrive. Security protocols, you understand. What Patricia didn't know was that, for the past 2 months, Keisha had meticulously documented every irregularity at that school. From teachers leaving children alone to smoke to the overbilling scheme that inflated parents' bills by thousands of dollars a month. If this story of injustice and determination touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what happened when that billionaire finally entered the room would not only change Keisha's life, but expose secrets that the entire elite preferred to keep buried. Jonathan Blackwell pushed the living room door open silently, his $3,000 Italian shoes making only a whisper on the waxed floor. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. His private housekeeper had reported that Thomas had been crying incessantly for days, but there was his son, sleeping peacefully in the arms of a woman he had never seen before. Mr. Blackwell. Patricia practically shouted, her face turning red. What a terrible coincidence. I just caught this employee violating our most basic protocols. Rest assured, she will be removed immediately. Keisha stood up carefully, holding Thomas as if he were made of crystal. Her eyes met Jonathan's, not with submission or fear, but with a dignity that made him hesitate before speaking. Daddy. Thomas had woken up and was reaching out his little arms toward his father, but when Jonathan approached to pick him up, the baby started crying and clung tighter to Keisha. This is absolutely unacceptable, Patricia continued, her shrill voice cutting through the morning air. Mr. Blackwell, you need to understand that this woman was sleeping on the floor like an animal. What kind of example does this set for the other children? Jonathan watched the scene with growing confusion. Thomas had never been this attached to anyone, not even the 3 highly qualified nannies he had hired on the recommendation of Elite Gardens itself. Keisha finally spoke, her calm voice cutting through Patricia's hysteria. Mr. Blackwell, your son has sensory difficulties due to mild cerebral palsy. He needs constant contact to regulate his body temperature and feel safe. The other teachers, she paused, choosing her words carefully, prefer more distant methods. More professional methods. Patricia corrected sharply. We are not a regular daycare center, Mr. Blackwell. We are an elite educational institution. It was then that Jonathan noticed something interesting. Keisha didn't seem surprised or desperate, as someone who had just lost her job should be. There was something in her eyes, a quiet certainty that intrigued him. 3 months earlier, Keisha had taken that job out of financial desperation. Her parents had died in a car accident, leaving her responsible for 3 teenage siblings and a mortgage that consumed 80% of her income. Elite Gardens paid $42,000 a year, much more than any public school. But from day one, she had sensed that something was deeply wrong with that place. The children with special needs were systematically neglected. Less qualified white teachers were given the best shifts and the smallest classes. And Patricia? Patricia had a very particular system of discipline for families who questioned her methods. "Mr. Blackwell," Patricia said, adjusting her blazer authoritatively, "I assure you we will find a much more suitable replacement to care for Thomas. Someone who understands our standards." Keisha gently stroked Thomas's back, who had stopped crying completely in her arms. "Of course," she replied, but there was something in her tone that made Patricia frown. "I'm sure you'll make the right decision for your son." Jonathan looked at Patricia, then at Keisha, then at his son, who was clearly calmer than he had been in weeks. Something wasn't right. In 16 years of building a business empire, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, all of them were screaming that there was much more going on here than met the eye. "Patricia," he said slowly, "I need to talk to you two separately before I make any decisions." What Patricia didn't know was that during those 3 months documenting irregularities, Keisha had discovered something much more serious than child neglect. She had found evidence of a fraud scheme involving systematic overbilling, ghost teachers on the payroll, and embezzlement of funds intended for children with special needs. Most interestingly, she knew exactly who was behind it all and had the evidence stored in a very safe place. While Patricia talked about institutional standards and professional conduct, Keisha smiled to herself. Because what that arrogant woman had no idea was that every prejudiced word, every discriminatory attitude, and every cruel decision had been carefully documented. And now, with the most powerful witness possible present in that room, the perfect moment to reveal the whole truth was finally arriving. 2 hours later, in the Elite Gardens conference room, Patricia meticulously organized a folder of false documents about Keisha's inappropriate behavior. She had called an emergency meeting with 3 influential mothers from the school board, all wives of powerful executives who paid the highest tuition fees. "We need to act quickly," said Patricia, adjusting her glasses authoritatively. "This employee clearly does not understand the standards of our institution. Sleeping on the floor like an animal? It's unacceptable." Mrs. Davidson, the Attorney General's wife, frowned. "Patricia, are you sure you're not overreacting? Jonathan Blackwell is one of our biggest contributors." "That's exactly why we need to protect him," Patricia replied firmly. "Imagine if the press found out that the school taking care of a billionaire's son employs people like that. It would be a scandal." Meanwhile, across town, Keisha was sitting in a small cafe with her younger brother, Marcus, a 22-year-old investigative journalism student. On the table, dozens of documents were organized into neat piles. "Sis, this is dynamite," Marcus said, leafing through the evidence Keisha had collected. "Overcharging for teaching materials, ghost teachers receiving salaries, embezzling funds for special needs children. Patricia is stealing almost $200,000 a year." Keisha nodded calmly. "And there's more. She has a system of extra fees that she charges parents of children with special needs. She emotionally blackmails them, telling them they need to pay for additional care that is actually required by law." Marcus pointed to a specific spreadsheet. "Look at this. She charges Blackwell an extra $3,000 for specialized sensory therapy for Thomas. But you told me there was never any therapy. She just let the baby cry in the nursery while the other teachers pretended not to hear him." "Exactly," Keisha confirmed, her hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from contained indignation. "And when I started taking proper care of him, she became furious because she knew I was finding out the truth." Over the past 3 months, Keisha had used her skills in educational technology to discreetly access the school's internal system. Every irregularity, every suspicious transaction, every moment of child neglect had been documented with scientific precision. She had photographed documents during her night shifts, recorded incriminating conversations on her cell phone, and even gained access to Patricia's internal emails. Marcus closed the last file. "You have enough material to destroy not only Patricia, but the entire board that's covering this up. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" Keisha smiled, the same enigmatic smile she had flashed the previous morning. "Remember how Dad used to say that patience is the most powerful weapon of the intelligent?" "Yes, but sis." "Marcus, Patricia has no idea who she's messing with. She thinks I'm just another black employee desperate for a job. She doesn't know that I graduated magna cum laude in special education, that I speak 3 languages, and that I spent 4 years working as an educational consultant before taking this job. The next morning, Patricia called Keisha in for a final termination meeting. The room was packed, the school board, 2 influential mothers, and even a school attorney. Everyone looked at Keisha with a mixture of pity and contempt as she entered, carrying only a simple folder. Keisha, Patricia began with false compassion. After careful consideration, we have decided that your educational approach does not align with our institutional values. You're fired, effective immediately. Keisha nodded quietly. I understand completely, Ms. Patterson. In fact, it's amazing how intelligent people can make such rash decisions. Patricia frowned at Keisha's calm and slightly ironic tone. Rash? I don't understand. Oh, it's just that I received a very interesting phone call last night, Keisha said, slowly opening her briefcase. From the State Department of Education. It seems that someone has made an anonymous report of financial irregularities and child neglect at this school. Patricia's face paled instantly. That's ridiculous. Who would do such a thing? Keisha smiled again, taking an official letter out of the envelope. Well, as you'll find out in approximately, she glanced at her watch, 15 minutes, when the investigators arrive, they have very detailed evidence. Documents, photographs, audio recordings. A 3-month investigation, in fact. Meanwhile, Jonathan Blackwell was in his office when he received a call from his personal lawyer. Jonathan, you need to know that there's an investigation underway at Thomas's school. Fraud, child neglect, systematic overbilling. Jonathan sat down slowly. And the teacher who was fired this morning? Apparently, she's the one who provided the evidence. And Jonathan, she's not just any teacher. Impeccable credentials, multiple specializations, consulting experience. She's been documenting everything for months. At that moment, Jonathan realized he had witnessed something much bigger than a simple unfair dismissal. He had witnessed the moment when an extraordinary woman decided it was time to reveal the truth. Back in the conference room, Patricia tried to maintain her composure as she watched Keisha calmly organize more documents on the table. You can't prove anything, she stammered, but her voice was shaking. Actually, Keisha said softly, I can prove everything. Every penny stolen, every child neglected, every lie told to parents. And the interesting thing, Patricia, is that the person who will be most interested in this evidence is the very person you tried to use against me today. She pointed to the window, where a black Bentley had just pulled up. Jonathan Blackwell was getting out of the car, accompanied by 2 men in suits who were clearly not ordinary lawyers. Because let me tell you something, Keisha continued, her voice remaining calm as chaos erupted around her, when you mess with someone who has spent months meticulously documenting every crime you've ever committed, you're not just getting fired from your job. You're about to find out that some people don't get revenge with anger, they get revenge with irrefutable evidence, surgical strategy, and perfect timing to ensure that justice is not only served, but watched by all the right people at the exact moment your mask finally falls. Federal investigators entered Elite Gardens like a silent tsunami. Agent Sarah Mitchell of the Department of Education carried 3 boxes of evidence and an expression that made Patricia break out in a cold sweat. Ms. Patterson, the agent said, showing her ID, we have a search warrant. We also have some questions about financial discrepancies reported at your institution. Patricia tried to maintain her composure, but her hands were shaking visibly. This must be some kind of misunderstanding. Our school has had an impeccable reputation for 15 years. 15 years of systematic fraud, actually, Keisha corrected calmly, opening her briefcase and spreading documents across the table. Agent Mitchell, here are the originals of everything I sent anonymously last week. Jonathan Blackwell entered the room at that exact moment, accompanied by his personal lawyer and a forensic accountant. His expression was that of someone who had just discovered he had been deceived for a long time. Patricia, Jonathan said, his voice as sharp as ice, I just got a very interesting call from my accountant. It seems I've been paying for specialized therapy for Thomas that never existed. Keisha stood up, meticulously organizing documents like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Mr. Blackwell, over the past 3 months, I have documented that Elite Gardens charges an average of $2,800 extra per month from each family with special needs children. Money for services that were never provided. She pointed to a specific spreadsheet. His bill shows a charge of $3,000 a month for specialized sensory therapy. In reality, Thomas spent hours crying alone in the nursery while the teachers completely ignored his needs. Patricia tried to interrupt. That's a lie. This woman is trying to get revenge for being fired. Fairly. Keisha smiled, but there was no humor in her eyes. She turned on her cell phone and put it on speaker. Patricia's voice echoed clearly through the room. These special kids are a financial burden. Their parents pay less in taxes because of medical deductions, so we have to make up for it in other ways. Make up whatever extra fees you need. They're too desperate to question it. Patricia's face turned white as a sheet. You illegally recorded me. Actually, Agent Mitchell said, consulting her notes, at staff meetings, recordings are permitted for educational purposes, according to your own employee handbook. Page 43. Keisha continued relentlessly, turning another page of evidence. I also have complete documentation on the ghost teachers. 5 employees receiving full salaries who never set foot in this school. Patricia pocketed $120,000 a year just from this fraud. Jonathan took one of the sheets, his eyes scanning the numbers with growing outrage. 3 years. We paid $320,000 in 3 years believing Thomas was receiving the best care possible. And there's more, Keisha continued, her voice maintaining its professional tone as she methodically destroyed Patricia's life. Federal funds earmarked for children with special needs. Patricia diverted 80% of that money to her personal account. I have bank statements, wire transfers, everything. Mrs. Davidson, from the school board, had fallen completely silent, realizing she had been sitting next to a criminal for years. Patricia, is this true? Patricia tried one last card. You can't trust this woman. She's just a resentful employee who has a master's degree in special education, magna cum laude, from Columbia University, Jonathan interrupted, consulting his phone. Who worked as an educational consultant for the New York Department of Education for 4 years before taking this job. Who could be making 3 times as much anywhere else. Agent Mitchell stood up. Mrs. Patterson, you are under arrest for federal fraud, embezzlement, and aggravated child neglect. The handcuffs clicked with a metallic sound that echoed through the silent room. This can't be happening, Patricia muttered as she was led away by the agents. You don't know who you're messing with. My family has connections. Had, Keisha corrected softly. Because when the families find out that their children were neglected while you were stealing money meant for their care, those connections are going to disappear very quickly. Jonathan looked at Keisha with a completely different expression. You planned all this from the beginning? No, Keisha replied honestly. I just wanted to work with children and help my family. But when I saw how Thomas and the other special children were treated, when I saw Patricia stealing money that was supposed to ensure proper care for them, well, I found I couldn't stay silent. Jonathan's lawyer approached. Miss Johnson, our firm would like to discuss some opportunities. What you did here today saved not only this school, but probably hundreds of children in similar situations. Keisha looked out the window, where Patricia was being put into the police car. Reporters had already arrived, cameras capturing every moment of the arrest of the principal who, for 15 years, had built an empire based on exploiting vulnerable families. You know what? Keisha said, grabbing her briefcase and heading for the door. When I woke up sleeping on the floor with Thomas this morning, my only concern was making sure he finally got some rest. I never imagined that moment would become the catalyst for exposing years of crimes against defenseless children. She paused at the door, looking back one last time. Patricia was right about one thing. I didn't really understand the standards of this institution. Because my standards have always been about protecting children, not profiting from their suffering. As sirens echoed outside and camera flashes lit up the windows, one question hung in the air. Was it possible to completely rebuild an institution corrupted by years of systematic neglect, or was there damage that even the most thorough justice could not repair? What would Keisha do now that she had exposed a network of corruption that went far beyond a simple private school? 6 months later, the national newspaper headline read, Former elite school employee founds Revolutionary Institute for Special Children, receives $50 million investment. Keisha Johnson sat in her new office, a large bright room in downtown Manhattan, surrounded by honorary degrees, certifications in inclusive education, and a framed photo of Thomas taking his first independent steps after months of proper therapy. Jonathan Blackwell entered carrying 2 coffees and a genuine smile. The first quarter numbers are in. 23 schools have already implemented our sensory care protocol. 215 special children are receiving proper treatment. And Patricia? Keisha asked, accepting the coffee. Sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud and 3 more years for aggravated child neglect. She lost her house, her cars, even her pension. She's working in the prison laundry for $2.50 an hour. Keisha nodded without showing any malicious satisfaction. What about the other families who were harmed? They all received full compensation. The restitution fund we set up has already distributed $4.5 million. The children who were neglected now have access to top-notch therapy at no cost to their families. 3 months after Patricia's arrest, Keisha had received calls from dozens of parents. Not just from elite gardens, but from similar schools across the country. Stories of abusive billing, systematic neglect, unprepared teachers, and principals who prioritized profit over childcare. "We want you to help us," said Mrs. Rodriguez, mother of a 6-year-old autistic child. "You were the only one who had the courage to speak the truth. The only one who documented everything and took action." That was how the Keisha Johnson Institute for Inclusive Education was born. Not just a school, but a training center for teachers, a laboratory for developing specialized protocols, and an oversight organization that audited schools suspected of abusive practices. Jonathan had offered $10 million in initial funding. Keisha accepted, but only as an investment, not as a donation. "I want to build something sustainable," she had explained. "Something that doesn't depend on the goodwill of billionaires to survive." Within 9 months, the Institute was serving more than 400 children directly and had trained 237 specialized teachers. The Johnson-Blackwell Protocol for Sensory Care had been officially adopted by the Department of Education in 3 states. "There's one more thing," Jonathan said, handing her an official envelope. This arrived today. It was an invitation from the National Congress. Keisha had been invited to testify before the Education Committee on necessary reforms to the system of protection for special children in private schools. "They're going to ask me about that morning," Keisha murmured, reading the invitation. "About why I slept on the floor with Thomas. And what will you say?" She smiled, but it wasn't the enigmatic smile of the early days. It was something new, lighter, more hopeful. That sometimes dignity isn't about keeping your composure, but about doing what's right, even when everyone around you thinks you're crazy. The following week, the congressional hearing room was packed. Television cameras captured every word as Keisha, wearing a simple navy blazer, answered questions from congressmen with the same methodical calm she had displayed when exposing Patricia. "Miss Johnson," said Congressman Williams, "in your opinion, what is the biggest flaw in the current educational oversight system?" "The assumption that expensive schools automatically provide better care," Keisha replied bluntly. "For 3 months, I documented an institution that charged $40,000 a year per child but provided care inferior to that of any well-run public daycare center. And how do we change that? Radical transparency. Quarterly surprise audits. Mandatory certified training for any professional working with special children. And most importantly, listen to the children. They know when they are being neglected." The testimony was broadcast nationally. 3 hours later, Keisha's office received 417 calls from parents, educators, and investors wanting to get involved with the Institute. Marcus, now a journalism graduate and working as the Institute's communications director, walked into the office with a stack of newspaper clippings. "Sis, you've become a national reference on inclusive education. Harvard wants you to teach a course. Princeton has offered you a permanent chair." Keisha shook her head. "I don't want to be a university professor. I want to continue working directly with the children." That night, she visited Thomas, now 16 months old, walking on his own and speaking his first words. Jonathan had hired 2 full-time specialized therapists and turned part of their mansion into a sensory development center. KK. Thomas ran to her as soon as he saw her, his steps still a little clumsy but determined. "He only started talking after you implemented the tactile communication protocol," Jonathan said, watching his son interact naturally with Keisha. 3 pediatricians said he would never speak before the age of 3. He just needed to feel safe enough to try, Keisha replied, kneeling down to Thomas's height. Special children aren't defective. They just navigate the world differently. A year after Patricia's arrest, Keisha received an unexpected letter. It was from her, written from prison. Keisha, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to protect. I met a woman here whose autistic daughter graduated from medical school thanks to a teacher who believed in her. I realized that I wasted 15 years trying to mold special children instead of adapting the world for them. I deeply regret the harm I caused. Keisha folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her drawer. Not out of anger or satisfaction, but as a reminder that even people who commit cruel acts can eventually find redemption. During an interview on national television, the host asked, Keisha, did you plan this revenge from day one? It wasn't revenge, she corrected gently. It was documentation. When you see systematic injustice, you have 2 choices: accept it as normal or document it meticulously until you have enough evidence to change it. I chose the latter. And what advice would you give to people facing similar situations? Keisha looked directly into the camera. Strategic patience is more powerful than impulsive anger. Document everything. Find allies. And remember, the best revenge is not destroying those who hurt you, but building something so important that the injustice you suffered becomes irrelevant. Today, 5 years after that morning when she slept on the floor with Thomas, Keisha runs an institute valued at $80 million, has been on the cover of Time magazine as Educator of the Year, and has trained more than 2,000 specialized teachers. Patricia remains in prison, working in the laundry and losing weight due to the stress of having destroyed her own life out of greed. The Keisha Johnson Institute has literally saved thousands of special children from educational neglect. And it all started because one woman decided that sleeping on the floor to comfort a child was more important than keeping up appearances for superiors who would never respect her anyway. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not to repay the evil you have suffered. It is to turn your pain into purpose and build a legacy that your enemies could never imagine. If this story of transforming injustice into social impact has touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that intelligence, documentation, and determination always win out over cruelty, prejudice, and arrogance in the long run.